All right, well, hello and welcome to the 2020 Food Dialogues. Thanks for joining us. My name is Kurt Ackerman. I'm from the South African Urban Food and Farming Trust, and we're pleased to be hosting the Food Dialogues once again. I will be brief. My connection is, during load shedding, and so is a bit rough. Just a note that this is being recorded, so please bear that in mind as you participate. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank our sponsors, the DSI NRF Center of Excellence in Food Security and the DG Murray Trust, and our partners, the African Center for Cities, Oribi Village, the City of Cape Town, Ickley, and Derrick. A priority in our session today is to encourage dialogue. These are the food dialogues, and we want to hear from you in the audience. Please use the Q&A function in Zoom for your questions, and we'll direct them to our moderator, Ellen. And note the comments in the chat window will not be used for questions, but feel free to use the chat to comment and to speak with one another if you like. We kicked off this year's Food Dialogues with an overview presentation on Cape Town's food system from Professor Jane Battersby on the 20th of July, and released 23 talks between the 27th and the 31st of July, all of which are available for replay on the Food Dialogues platform at capetown.fooddialogues.info. And this week we've had 5 themed panel discussions taking place, one each day, and we are glad you've joined us and invite you to lend your voice to the dialogues on this final one. Today's theme is on food and economics, and the discussion will be moderated by Ellen Fischat. She's Managing Director of Oribi Village. And with that, over to you, Ellen.
Thank you very much, Kurt. Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to have you here. As Kurt mentioned, my name is Ellen Fischat, and I am the Managing Director for Oribi Village. And just to give you a bit of context about myself, I'm not a food specialist, not at all. I actually work in the field of technology, but in the last 5 months, I joined Oribi, and I think that the whole discussion around food is not only something that I have, out of choice had to, am now familiarizing myself with, but I think it's something that no one actually in the world can ignore now. And today, I've got some fabulous speakers. These are really, I was reading their bios. We had a quick call yesterday. I've obviously also been listening to and seen their videos, and it's just incredible to see how much work goes into food. So it's not only the growing of the food, the distribution, but it's understanding how we have food for tomorrow, the impact if what happens if we don't have food, that directly affects our economy. So today's discussion is really me learning from the specialists, getting their opinions, and also encouraging you to join in on this conversation. I think it's a discussion, or I know it's a discussion that no one in South Africa can actually ignore anymore. It's not about I suppose the whole sexy part of food or food specialities. It's become a critical necessity, and the vulnerabilities within our society have only been highlighted through COVID-19. It's not something new, it's something that always existed, but I'm hopeful that through these kinds of discussions and next, of course, actions, that we move to a space where we build our own solutions, because if we're going to wait for them, I fear that we're going to have more hungry people. So please, send your comments, ask the questions that you have, because you have the opportunity for this. Thank you again to the SA Food Urban Trust for inviting me to moderate this session. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask the panelists, our speakers, to introduce themselves, because I think that people do themselves justice. I'm not going to try and attempt to remember, their accolades and why they're actually known and why they're such important people in our ecosystem. And not only from a food perspective, but from an economic perspective. So I'm going to ask you, Sheryl, to please introduce yourself and tell us what you do and what your claim to fame is.
Thank you, Ellen. I guess you're starting with me because I'm the greyest of the lot.
No, we don't believe in ageism.
But so my food journey started when I found myself with a gun to my head in my home when I moved into Oranjezicht about 12 years ago. And I got over the trauma of that incident, and then I decided to ask questions about my community and who looked after public space and who looked after the safety of the community, and was there anybody working with the police? And the answer to those questions was no, there was no one. So we started a little neighborhood watch, and during that time I found a neglected bowling green, which I realized after doing some research was part of an original farm dating back 300 years, where most of the food in the Cape Colony was being grown. It was called the Upper Table Valley area, and one of the farms was named Oranjezicht, and it was owned by the Van Breda family, who had farmed there for 200 years. Eventually it was turned into a bowling green by the city, and that became neglected. And a group of us, including Kurt, got together and said, could we turn this old neglected bowling green into a community farm where we would grow food, teach people how to grow food, where their food came from, and importantly, get our community to meet around food. And the long and the short of it was the city gave us the land, and we've been active with our beautiful community farm for 8 years, but then we needed money to pay the farmers because the volunteers wouldn't come out when it was raining or when a pump broke. And we started a small, tiny market with a hay bale and a box of grapes. And that grew and grew and grew into a market that is now at Granger Bay, a farmer's market. There are about 300 people employed there. We take about 40 million rand in income to GDP every year through all the 80 traders that work there. And really, Ellen and fellow panelists, it's an experiment that we've tried to understand if the model is scalable, if we could have 100 farms all over the Western Cape, maybe South Africa, with little markets, supplying market gardens, supplying communities with fresh, nutritious food. And if we can do it at the V&A and run a proper business and make enough money to pay rentals and everything else, then I really do believe that we can do it context by context throughout the country. And that's really my initial foray with food. Always I was involved in the non-profit sector. It's the first time I'm really running a business. I have to sharpen my entrepreneurial teeth every single day, especially now through the COVID period. But it's been a phenomenal process, and changing the food system bunch of carrots by bunch of carrots, getting more people to want to eat organic vegetables and good healthy food. And I don't see why, if we can have a McDonald's on every street corner, we can't have a market garden with a beautiful weekly market selling fresh food to everybody.
All right. Thank you for that, Sheryl. Just a side note, but I'll come back to that. Maybe, you know, with the McDonald's on every corner, the McDonald's has got somewhat the branding has been done better than for the bunch of carrots. So maybe we also now need to look at our messaging around carrots, but I hear you. Thank you for that. Errol, I'm going to ask you, please, to introduce yourself. Errol, are you still with us?
Yes, Errol, you're on mute.
Ah, thank you. Am I on mute? Oh, Errol's on mute.
Sorry for that. My name is Errol Sibisi. I'm from Lowbeck, but I've associated myself with ethnic communities of the likes of Khayelitsha, Khayelitsha, Nyanga, Philippi, and so on. I'm not really a specialist, as much people will say, specialist for food. But I came across a group of informal traders that were selling food. It varies, food varies according to the demand that is there. There will be vegetables, there will be people who are doing food for or food for pig, which is just frying meat and so forth. So there's various sector for food. But what we discovered there is that they do not have a voice. They are just on their own. It's a survival business, and we formed an organization purely to strengthen their voice. This happened in 2011, and I've been involved with them. At that time, I'm an auditor by profession. Then I was going there to do, there's something that is called a regulatory auditing. That is a non-financial audit that I concentrate on. Then I used to go there to find a clients that is for that type of business that I was doing. But funny enough, I got involved with them. Then I started being introduced into their business and everything. And today I'm part of the food dialogue.
That's great. I think, well, I think you're a specialist. That's why you're talking. That's why you're here today. We think you have a lot of wisdom to share. But it's interesting, Errol, that you point out that, I mean, I also introduced myself saying I'm not a food specialist, but actually, if we're lucky, most of us eat every day, right? A couple of times. So food is the one thing that all humans share with each other. And I think that when we do, even if it's from different perspectives, that once we go down to the fundamentals with regards to food, I think we then only begin to understand the complexities and where our different skills can fit in. So I'm looking forward to, I've got quite a couple of questions for you about the informal markets and what you learned, or what you are learning in working in that sector. But thank you for the introduction. I'm going to ask Reena. Reena, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much, Ellen, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this dialogue. It's been really great just over the course of this dialogue to engage with the fellow panelists who come from sort of very different angles into this question or the questions that we have about food. So that's been really great. The interdisciplinary nature of the food dialogues has been really, really important and useful to me. And of course, sharing the lived experiences. I mean, here I can confidently say that I'm the one with the least experience being a researcher. And on that note, let me just introduce myself and give a bit of background. My name is Reena Nair. I am a senior researcher at the Center for Competition Regulation and Economic Development, which is a research center at the University of Johannesburg. And my interest in food really started with my research around supermarket chains. So quite a few research projects that I was working on looked at the role of supermarket chains in stimulating the development of food value chains in South Africa. And as the research progressed, I started looking at countries outside South Africa. And that's where I really I got struck by how difficult it is for SME, small and medium-sized food processors to access supermarket chains. And then I guess my research took me to trying to understand what the barriers are in accessing these supermarket chains and what some of the alternatives are. And here I am looking at all questions around inclusion in food systems and how we can make our food systems more inclusive. So thanks very much, Ellen.
Thank you, Reena. I think just before I ask Miles to introduce himself, can you explain to, for those of us that are listening in and don't know what the Association for Competition and Regulation is, what is it you do?
So it's the center that
what does the organization do?
Yeah, so we primarily do research around issues of competition, regulation, as well as industrial development type questions. We do work, for example, for the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, trying to understand markets. So our research is very focused at a sort of microeconomic level, and we try to understand what some of the barriers to entry and participation are in different markets, what sort of policy measures can be developed or tailored to try and make different markets more inclusive. So it's not just limited to food. We look at other industries as well. But my sort of area of interest in the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years has been around food.
Food.
So
Okay.
primarily a research organization informing policy.
Good. I'm going to come back to that because the policies that are created need to be informed, and like in an exclusive, not exclusive, in an inclusive way as well, that all voices are heard. Thank you, Reena. Miles, last but certainly not least, tell us, what is your claim to fame?
Still working on that. Hello, everybody. My name is Miles Kubheka. I call myself a philanthropreneur because I've come to realize that, you can do good and good can be actually a good business, it turns out. My favorite or my core focus, and it found me late in life, I guess, or in mid stage of my life, is food. I always knew I liked eating it. I didn't know I wanted to be involved in it. So my background, I'm a systems engineer, trained, studied at WITS, and I'm a geek. I worked for Microsoft for almost 10 years and loved tech, traveled the world, and you quickly realize how multinationals think. They think big. They think, I remember my first day arriving there. My first day at Microsoft was actually, I didn't know where my desk was in South Africa, but I was already in London on my first day. But I remember when they have these big briefing sessions where they bring all the new guys from all over the world to a big session in the US. And I remember Bill Gates getting on stage and saying, we will put a PC on every desktop in the world. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm not sure what green stuff this guy is smoking, because most of Africa doesn't even have electricity. And this guy is thinking he's going to be putting PCs on every desktop. Fast forward, I don't know, 15 years later, cell phones outnumber people 3 to 1 in Africa. So that taught me the power of dreaming big, because your dream might not execute in the way you thought about it, but dream seriously big. Which is a nice caveat to what then happened to me after, being at Microsoft for 7 years. I saw this advert about this Vuyo character who was a big dreamer, and I Googled to discover there was no Vuyo. It was totally a fictitious character. I trademarked it and I became Vuyo from that day on. And I started dreaming big. I wanted to put South African cuisine restaurants on every corner. Could never understand why we stand in queues for days when an overseas food brand comes into our country, and yet we've got such rich food as Africans. We've got superfoods that the rest of the world could certainly use now. And yeah, that started me in my journey on food. And of late, over during COVID, I then got roped into SA Harvest to assist with communities that don't have food. So that's been an amazing experience. When I started, I was feeding about 200 people a day. And last month we did over 80,000 people.
In a month?
Those numbers are not numbers to be proud of, because it tells you how bad the situation is. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Okay, Vuyo. We're going to call you Miles for this for this session. Thank you, Miles. So for those of you that have just joined in, if you're maybe late with logging in, we're having a discussion. We're having engaging in dialogue about food and food in the economy. And I think I'd also just like to explain to you how I think, or I'd like us to leave not only feeling more desperate, but hopefully also having some sort of idea of how we individually, as we sit in and listen to this discussion, can get involved and can help build the solution to this problem. So I'd like to talk about all of the negative things. I think it's always good, when you go into that meeting and you know that there's big news ahead and everyone's nervous, and they introduce a new policy at work, or they introduce a new rule, then people always, everyone complains. Everyone complains about why this is wrong. I think our government and our president has certainly been getting his share of what is wrong with the solutions that have been, or policies that have been put into place. So I think it's important that we first get all the negativity out of us. We list, and I'd like to know, because all of you play different roles within your own systems, within the economy, within the food system. And I want to know what's wrong, and then rest assured, people, we're going to move on to the opportunity, because the fortunate thing about problems is that it breeds opportunity for solutions. And that's where I would like to go for. But I'm first going to ask you to get rid of all the negativity you have in you. And Sheryl, I'd like to start with you. Why does our food system, or what's wrong with our food system, that it has that we're having issues where Miles is feeding 80,000 people in 1 month? I mean, because we're not a poor country. So from your perspective, coming out of the NGO world, with all your experience, what are the problems?
Well, I think, Ellen, I need a punching ball. I wish I had one, because this is a topic that is so vast and so complex and so unnecessary that we should be talking even about the negatives, when you rightly say there is so much food available in this country. But Ellen and fellow panelists, we all know that our food system is broken. And that means not that there isn't sufficient food in the country, but it really means that we have 80% of vulnerable communities being food insecure. And that means that they are not getting access to nutritious food. We don't even measure, Ellen, as a country, we don't even measure what people are eating. We measure the price of a basket of food, but we don't measure what's in that food. We don't measure what people are actually eating. If you compare a vulnerable family in South Africa to a similar vulnerable family in a place like India, you will not believe the difference in the kind of food that they are eating. From highly processed, full of sugar, high in carbohydrate, high in calories, low in nutrition diet of a South African vulnerable family, to a vulnerable family in India that has access to fresh produce, tomatoes, beans, squash, pumpkin, very low in carbohydrate diet. They are eating nutritious food. And we know that if you don't have access to nutritious food, your entire cognitive development as an adult will be impacted, and your potential to live a happy and fulfilled life with a career will be decreased because you haven't had access to the correct nutrition. So it's probably the most important thing in this country right now. Every other human right has a ministry. We have a Ministry of Health, a Ministry of Education, a Ministry of Housing. We don't have a Ministry of Food to make sure that every South African eats a nutritious meal every day. So what's happening is we have farmers, they are growing with pesticides and chemicals. We have massive big farms. They're not using regenerative agriculture. All this produce is coming into the supermarkets. It's not food that is nutritious. It's food that is grown to the specification of the supermarket for tomatoes that can fit into a punnet at 200 grams. They're not tasty. They're not full of flavor. They don't have high in nutrient value. And that is the food that we are being exposed to, because that's commercially available. So
are you then, if I'm going to ask you what's the big problem, are you saying it's the access to nutritional food, or is it the lack of information or education that people have around nutrition?
I think both. I think both. It's definitely access, because if we had access to food, there would be education that went with it. I think we're highly dominated by the supermarket culture. We all know that there's hundreds and thousands of shopping centers all over South Africa, each one with the supermarket as the anchor tenant, around which are all these sort of fast food outlets. So, and I agree with you, the marketing of fast food outlets is unbelievably superior to anything that any of the small scale farmers could do around food. But yeah, so it's access to food, nutritious food, and it's also about education surrounding what we should eat. And I think there is a cultural aspect to that as well, that we would rather have a McDonald's or a Kentucky Fried Chicken and a beautiful broccoli salad. And if there's not meat in a meal, well, then that's not a meal. Nyama, you know, we have to have a nyama, otherwise it's not a meal. So yeah, I think it's a couple of aspects. And also, I think it's growing food. You know, if people aren't exposed to growing food, then we don't understand where our food comes from. It doesn't come from a tin. It doesn't come from a packet. It comes from the soil, the earth that has to be nurtured and looked after. We measure GDP all the time, Ellen, but that's also can increase when you have sick people. But we should be measuring the happiness of people and how
the health of people,
how they're eating, and the health, exactly.
Well, happiness is measured, and we don't score very high in South Africa, actually, and I think that's because of a whole lot of issues. Sheryl, I'm gonna come back to you. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask a very provocative question, Errol. Please feel free to answer as directly as I'm posing the question. So. Sheryl makes a very valid point. She speaks about access, you know, on the one hand, it's an educational matter, and on the other hand, there's insufficient access to nutritious food. From my work that I've done in my previous life as a social worker, but even now as a techpreneur, going into communities and preaching to people about the importance of technology and how that's going to improve their lives, I want to ask you, working with the informal traders as you do, Errol, what do you see in response to what Sheryl is saying around the knowledge around nutritious food? Is it an access to that information issue, or is it a cultural issue? Let's just lay it on the table and you tell me your ideas.
Are you on mute again?
Okay. It's not a cultural thing. If you take a same person that stays in Khayelitsha, but who also stays in Eastern Cape, you'll find that the one that lives in Khayelitsha has got the knowledge. They understand what type of food must they eat. They understand what to plow. But in Khayelitsha, remember, he has been placed in a four-corner small house, limited with land that he can plow in. Small house. You see, that's a big deciding factor, because he understands what he needs to eat, but he is not allowed to plow what he needs to eat.
Okay, so I like that. So you're demystifying. It's not a cultural thing. We don't culturally eat unhealthy, because I want to say to you,
I tell you, I've been to Eastern Cape myself. I'm not from Eastern Cape. I'm a Zulu boy. I'm coming from Umlazi in a township. I don't know much about the rural area, but I've been to Eastern Cape. Those people, they spend much time. They survive on things that are plowed. They survive on cows that are being grown. You know, they have everything. You name it. But immediately once they come into a metro, staying in a city, staying in a township, the limitation of the place to plow, to grow things, it's not there. It's really limited. It's not there.
So you're raising two issues: the spatial issue, and Sheryl also referred to it earlier. And we still have lots of unused grounds, and there's always these very long political discussions about whether the space can be used or not. And then you're also saying, I also hear you saying it's like more of a cultural city issue. It's not so much the fact that people don't know. That's what I hear you saying in response, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So then I want to go to I want to go on to you, Reena. I want you to tell me, what does the science say about all this? What does the research say? Because it's very interesting that the land issue, we know that's a hot topic in South Africa, arable grounds, that kind of thing, and people not having access to it. But then also, Errol speaks about the cultures in city. Can you tell us something about people's access to nutritious food in your studies that you've done with the big supermarkets? Because Sheryl's actually saying that the problem lies with the specifications of supermarkets. What does the research tell us? Thank you, Errol.
Yeah.
So much about my research has been, as I said earlier, around the role that supermarkets play in terms of access to food, and you can bring in access to nutritious food. Our research hasn't focused as much on the nutritional side of things, but we've looked at what it means for more inclusive participation. So if I have to just take a step back to what you asked earlier in terms of what I think the biggest issues are, from the research perspective, from a sort of firm level economics perspective, it has to do with the high levels of concentration that we see. The effects of that is what is perpetuated, or the effects of that is what is revealed in the lack of nutritious food, if you like, the lack of food that's affordable food, if you like. And what do I mean by high levels of concentration? If you look at food value chains, from the very beginning, from the level of selling seeds or inputs like fertilizers, right through farming and the production level, the processing level, distribution till it gets to retail, we see very concentrated markets at all these different levels. You have a handful of firms that essentially control these markets at each level. And what that means is that your SMEs that can produce or that could produce more nutritious food or that could serve areas that are otherwise underserved struggle to access or to participate in this value chain in a fair way. So just to give you an idea, if you look at the processing level, you've got your big multinationals that dominate many markets. If it's or milling, you've got your 4 or 5 large firms that control those sales in that market. At the retail level, as Sheryl was saying, you've got your very strong, your dominant supermarket chains that control that channel. And what our research has shown, and this is included, included quite a lot of field work around the country, is that your SMEs don't feature in that value chain at all. Instead, they're sort of marginalized to supplying alternative routes to market. And this is not necessarily a bad thing. It's good that SMEs can supply wet markets, independent retailers. That's all great. But the way the policies and the system is structured is that they're not given enough support in order to enter and participate effectively. So in a nutshell, what I think is one of the biggest problems in our food system is that you've got these high levels of concentration. It means that it hinders participation at different levels. And then it results in this kind of dual food system. The big players that can supply through the supermarket chains, the smaller players that are forced or sort of marginalized to supply through alternative routes to markets, and never being given a chance to build their capabilities to meet some of the requirements to supply, for example, the supermarket chains. And this dual system has been exposed, particularly during COVID-19. The formal bigger players continue to operate because food is obviously essential. Their value chains were not disrupted. The smaller players struggled. Their routes to market were essentially blocked. Those that were selling to school feeding schemes, for example, or the schools closed, they couldn't supply. So the COVID-19 situation just highlighted how this sort of dual food system really works against SMEs that are trying to participate in it. And a lot of our research is around that, and it's trying to understand what are the sources of power that are continuing to perpetuate this kind of system, and what can we do to alleviate that. So it does to the nutritional aspect, although we focused much more on the sort of inclusion from an SME perspective aspect.
Okay. So Reena, a conspiracy question here. So do you think that the big boys, I'll say big boys because usually the wealthy ones are the boys, there's very few big girls. But do you think that they're also keeping it that way? Because on the one hand, you would think it would be better for business if the smaller retailers or these independent growers are more involved, because I think you just have more supply. It's just a question for me. What is your take on that? Or do you think that they just don't know?
I think that's a really great question. I mean, and it's we see this across the board in different industries of how, the kind of status quo that existed in the early 90s kind of continues to operate. I don't want to call it a big boys club, but you know, in many food value chains, that's exactly what you have. And it's very, very hard to try and enter into those value chains because scale usually works against some of the smaller players.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of it has to do with it's the pie is only so big, and it's trying to control as much of the pie as possible, and sort of in doing that, engaging in conduct or engaging in behavior that's exclusionary in nature. Whether it's intentional or not, I don't want to comment on that. I hope it's not intentional. The outcome is definitely exclusionary. So, if you control an essential input, and an SME requires access to that input, if you price that input too high, you're pricing the SME out of the market immediately.
Yeah.
So the effect is exclusionary, even though the intention hopefully is not. But I stand to be corrected. If you think about the cartels that have been uncovered in food, the bread cartel.
The bread cartel, I was going to say, yes.
Yeah. So that's something where intention really does come to play. There was intention there to keep prices high. And in keeping those prices high, you also have to think about the effect on other SME bakers who want to participate in that value chain. The cartel doesn't serve to keep prices high to end users or end consumers, but it also prevents entry of small and medium-sized bakers in that system. So yeah, you have examples of where there is some intention, and hopefully the law deals with them adequately. And in other cases where there may not be intention, but there's definitely an exclusionary effect.
Okay, thank you, Reena. Miles, I'm going to go over to you quickly, because I also have I don't know if you can answer it, but I'd just like you to give a go, to please share your opinion with us. So going back to the whole culture and the culture of food and what we eat, and then going to the knowledge part, what Sheryl was talking about. So you're someone that has also traveled, different continents, stayed for different periods of times. You've been in the West. You're also an African boy. Why is it? So the one thing I want to ask, like if you travel in Europe, but even if you're in Cape Town for that matter, we see that being organic, growing, eating healthily is something that is sometimes seen as hip. Okay, so if I look at my family, for example, some of them do not understand that my kids eat what they eat, and they don't understand that I feed it to my children, because they're like, no child likes that. And, my father's giving them chocolates, and I'm like, take this cream soda away from my child. So I want to ask you, on the one hand, you see in Europe, you see these urban markets, you see that it's not hip to be eating McDonald's. If anything, that market is diminishing, and it's like all these bars with smoothies and salads, and there's money to be made in that, and especially if it's underpinned by a tech platform. And then we see on the South African side, and I'm just speaking from my knowledge perspective of South Africa, in Cape Town, it's all cool, it's hip, we understand, we all have our seeds and superfoods, and we pay a lot of money for those superfoods. Why is it, in your opinion, why are we not growing? Why is that just seems a small group of people, and why haven't the rest of us caught on?
Well, firstly, I'd like to categorically state that Cape Town is part of Europe, so there's that.
True.
So let's just start there. Like you said, I must be honest, so I'm going to call it what it is. It is what it is. So and then the second part, I always say that, if you're poor, food is a chore. If you are well off, food is an experience, right? So if my mom is working long hours, she has to catch a cab to come home. So for getting food out is about just sustenance at very least, and it's just happiness that it's there. But the further up you move in the economic sphere, knowledge is even that more readily accessible. But also it comes with privilege. You can afford to pay a little bit more to get what you want, and it becomes a norm, right? So I'm particularly interested with markets. My business actually started at a market, at a Forest Farmers Market. And I was very excited with when markets started, because I saw that as the lower entry point, because there's a high barrier to entry into the food system generally. You know, you got to have a kitchen. It's like, now all of a sudden you could just cook. I mean, I started buying my wors just there, you know, and then the hipsters came, and then I had to figure out how to make it a little bit more organic and more vegan. But the point is, there was a start. It cost me $350 a day, and you know, you couldn't blame it on supermarkets anymore. Those big boys, like we've said, they could do their own thing and let them, you know, I mean, I'm not pro it, but at least there was an avenue for startups to come in. And that's why I loved markets. And it did a world of wonders for me. The problem is, though, what I then discovered is that they're very, like you said, they're very bourgeois, or they sit in a little, they became exclusionary than, you know, welcoming. They kind of indirectly, at a smaller scale, replicated what the big retailers are doing perversely. But it still doesn't change that it's a bloody good business model, or a model that we should fight very hard to put one in Khayelitsha, one in Soweto, because they do work, right? And they serve the local community. And that's the best way to circumvent big retail. And give access to smaller business. I'm very passionate about this. If I could see, this is one of those things I would like to, when I'm sitting or laying down and looking up above my tombstone, I would have liked to see more of these rolled out across the country. In fact, across the continent.
I think you need to
Sorry, I'm very
Sheryl.
passionate about this subject.
I think you need to speak to
Yeah,
Sheryl.
I think we've got a partnership. It's there already. I can see it, Miles.
Awesome, let's do it. Let's talk.
And then if we get, sorry, go ahead.
So I was just saying that just to fully close off your question about nutrition or healthy food. Healthy food is largely, or excess. I always joke that it's an excess versus excess. There's, you know, often there's excess of food sitting somewhere, but the people who need access to it don't have access to it, because quite frankly, there's a lot of very good, healthy, cheap, nutritional produce that's probably being thrown away. In fact, I know it's being thrown away. So there's a lot of food that's just going to waste that could go to communities that need it. So, yeah.
Okay. Just last question before I go into the next discussion that I want to have. What is the problem not as what is the problem they experience, but how do the smaller retailers contribute to, how do they actually, do they have a role in maintaining this unequal system? I'm just wondering, if let's say I'm a big boy, what problem would I say there is with the smaller retailers, Mal?
I think some of it is legitimate, right? Let's be frank, we're dealing with food. It's something people ingest, right? So the repercussions of getting that wrong, you can see. And the bigger the brand, the bigger the target. But some of it is a bit of a cop-out. So they use that as a barrier to entry. But, you know, at some point, as an entrepreneur, I don't like apportioning blame, even when it's duly deserved, right? I'm more like, okay, that's a problem. So what's the solution? What can I do to get around that, right? I don't romanticize the problem. I focus most of my energy on the solution part. And I think on the solution part, like what we had started doing with local markets, creating a marketplace or an off-taker situation, we did a good job. The next level that was meant to happen was on the maybe production and as well as the last mile stuff. In other words, get us organized as retail, because that's all retail managed to do. I mean, it's big boxes, but what they value add is the ability to refrigerate, to distribute. So if we could have added that layer above, like for example, small markets, all of a sudden those small businesses now can go online, can do delivery, you're taking them to the next level. So, but that's on us more so than it is on them. You know,
big
they
guys.
focus on their business. We need to focus on ours.
So I'm going to come back to the digital aspect of that. I just want to answer, there's two questions in the Q&A that I'd like to just have answered now before we go on. So there's a question here from Gareth Haysom. It's for Reena. The question is, Reena, could you perhaps offer a comment on the role played by large lobby groups in maintaining the status quo, and groups such as the CGCSA? You will know what that is, and those in the nutrition space. Are their actions perhaps not exclusionary, and should the Competition Commission not be called to focus on the actions and the practices of these bodies? Then, sorry. And then the next question that we have, excuse me guys, I'm just having some technical. The next question is from Lutondo. What is the opinion, and that's for anyone who wants to answer, what is the opinion on the health hazard of unregulated markets or smaller retailers, even the informal traders? I know that you said something about that in your interview, Errol. So would you please say something about that, Reena? Answer Gareth's question.
Sorry, I was just unmuting. Sure. Yeah, so a lot of the large players do lobby governments for various reasons, not necessarily mentioning any names, but there are concerns around lobbying for certain types of protection. If you think about a group of very large processors in a particular industry lobbying against import penetration, so lobbying for tariffs to prevent much cheaper imports coming into the country, you can think of that as lobbying for some level of protection. And I think Gareth's absolutely right. It does serve to maintain the status quo in many ways. These groups are powerful enough, and they kind of have the levers to kind of push with government. So for example, they say, if you don't protect our industry through tariffs, as an example that I gave earlier, it will result in so many job losses. And they have the ability to say that because they're usually pretty large groups. So absolutely, the lobbying of governments through industry groupings, industry associations, can potentially serve to maintain the status quo, and which is why, you know, before kind of any sort of protection is offered, one really needs to understand the markets that we're talking about. One needs to understand the sources of power that we're talking about, because it can be a very dangerous game to play by kind of allowing certain protection, but that protection is to the detriment of new entrants. Getting in. So yeah, in a nutshell, Gareth, absolutely, it's something that could be problematic. However, the lobbying, in whatever form the lobbying is, and it's something that the Commission would look at if it's, you know, an industry association that creates some kind of exclusionary practice. It's something that the Commission would look at.
Thank you. Reena, just following up on that question that Gareth has, I think more as like a private consumer and someone that I suppose is not really aware of my rights with regards to, and if I have them, with nutritional food and working in a food incubation program. I'm actually curious, like, what sort of rights do we have as these, you know, small businesses, and you know, we're sort of like creating an alternative supply chain here, you know, because again, the big boys won't play nicely. So I'm not against big boys, guys, just like you said. But what can we do? Can we do something? Where could we go to?
Yeah, I think that's really, it's really important. This is the kind of the knowledge, or, you know, to kind of share the knowledge around where or what the avenues for recourse are for SMEs that are perhaps being bullied in the system. And, you know, the public has the opportunity to approach the Competition Commission directly if they feel that they're being charged an unfair price from an input perspective, or if they feel that this sort of, you know, boys club is not allowing them to participate in the market. There are avenues. They can go approach the Competition Commission. Investigations can be done to that regard. And things like high prices of inputs, there are provisions in the law that are there just to protect companies from being exposed to excessive pricing. So the public can approach the Competition Commission directly. Something that's really important, which is fairly new, and there might not be that much awareness around this yet, is the new buyer power regulations of the Competition Commission. And this is precisely to help small and medium-sized enterprises in designated sectors, and food is one of them. Agriculture and agro-processing is one of the sectors that has been designated. And it's exactly to kind of deal with the problems that you're raising, Ellen, around being bullied in terms of what terms and conditions I have to adhere to as a small and medium-sized enterprise if I want to get my product onto a supermarket shelf. You know, being told that I'm only going to get payment after 60 days, which is going to kill my cash flow and destroy my business. These provisions of the Act are there to protect those kinds of players in food value chains. So yeah, there's definitely something to be said about.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's fairly new. It's something that's kind of just come into play this year. So there are avenues to approach the competition.
What is it called?
It's called the Buyer Power regulations, and recently Buyer Power guidelines were released for designated sectors. It's available on the Competition Commission's website. Sets out quite clearly what firms that are considered to have power, what they can and they can't do in negotiating with various players along the value chain.
That's
so that's
good to know.
In which we can kind of create more awareness here. There's also a very strong role, I think, for civil society organizations to kind of mobilize in creating, you know, platforms that can disseminate this kind of information to SMEs. And last but not least, the role of industry associations. I think that's extremely important. I mean, Gareth talked about the Consumer Goods Council of South Africa, the CGCSA, but in many food value chains, you have industry associations. And I'd like to see a lot more representation of small players in those industry associations. At the moment, it's kind of, again, the big boys form the major representation on these associations, and the voices of SMEs kind of go unheard. So there are ways, Ellen, in which the SMEs can directly
okay, great.
Issues.
Great, thank you. Errol, do you want to take the question around that Lukhanyo had around the informal, the health hazard about unregulated markets? Errol?
Yes, you know, I've been enjoying just listening. Can you repeat your question first?
So Lukhanyo had the question, let me just go to it. He said, what is your opinion on the health hazard of unregulated markets, smaller retailers, or even the informal traders? What is your opinion on that?
There's a big challenge in those markets. Quite frankly, there's a big challenge. You know, these people doesn't know hygiene, quite frankly. And if you speak about health hazard, it's at a bigger level. But let's go into a space whereby we are talking about hygiene, just a basic hygiene. They don't know a basic hygiene, and that is why we were formed. We try to teach these informal traders how hygiene is important. It's not just important for yourself, but it's also important for your customer. And in terms of preventing disease that may spread in a township without knowing, because you are serving food, but not in a hygienic way. But you see, the markets, once you start to be hygienic, they don't buy to you. That's the problem. And they say, that lady is a finicky, he's got a funny stuff. I cannot buy that food. It's funny. It's how they are, you know. So in other words, we need to educate now the customers. Okay? The public itself needs to be educated to know that the right way of trading is this way, and in that way it can be successful.
A very, very interesting point. Thank you for that you raised. So it's, as consumers, you know, I mean, but as buyers, we should also be informed. And I think, again, it goes back to, for me, it also goes back to education, because if you know what you're eating in certain fast foods and how what goes into that and how it's processed, you would not be wanting that in your body. And, you know, the bunch of carrots or healthy food does not have to be untasty, not at all. In fact, there's an economy built around it that we spoke about earlier. I see that I'm using too much of the time for my personal questions about just like, what is this? And so we've spoken about the negative things, and I know they're not all conclusive, or it's not an extensive list, but we spoke about education of issues of access and excess, education around it, space not being used optimally, and which is especially important, Sheryl, when you're looking at urban areas, and then even when it's like high density areas, policies and systems, and that actually as consumers, we actually have a role to play in demanding speaking up for the rights that we have, if we know that we have them. And then the technology. So I just want to so Sheryl, I want to ask you a question. When I moved into the food system space now since 5 months ago, a lot of the work that I see, so I see the incubatees doing amazing work, you know, in terms of what they grow and their produce, and then even some of the like artisanal agro-processing that happens, you know, beautiful. What I don't understand is, so if I see someone's got this amazing product, I'm thinking, okay, now what you need is an e-commerce platform, and you need some technology to scale, as we would say in tech. What is your take on people's appetite for technology? Because it's not something there seems to be, I get the idea sometimes that they think that if there's technology involved, and that could be a platform, as I say, then it's not organic or free. Like, what is your take on that? What technology do you use?
Yeah, well, I mean,
have you used to grow your business to, you know, the 40 million annually, the GDP? What did you do?
I mean, I've used very little technology, to be honest, and I think that caught us napping now, COVID, because at the end of the day, we saw online sales surging and the retailers weren't able to keep up. So there's a lot of businesses have started up that are using technology to literally meet the demand from the consumer, delivery services, veg boxes, pantry items that are all being delivered to residents throughout our city. So you can see technology working, but I think technology in itself, it has to meet a demand. And
yes.
One of the most incredible entrepreneurs that I came across was a Kenyan startup in Kenya who was using technology to service hawkers on the street corners.
Yeah.
But if you think about our hawkers selling spinach and kale and all the delicious, nutritious food, they've all got to go to the Epping market to get their produce. They don't have vehicles, they don't have cash on them. You have to have a little card that you can buy with there. It has to be done early in the morning. So this Kenyan startup, everybody's got a phone, as we know. They can order what they want, and this Kenyan startup will deliver with a tuk-tuk to the street corner, so that the entrepreneur doesn't have to go at 4 in the morning to Epping, the market where they're competing with buyers from all the big supermarkets. So by the time you've got there, the pallets have already been sold at great prices to the big boys, as you call them, and the small entrepreneurs left either with nothing or to pay very, very high prices. And we've seen, you know, that at the end of the day, price, we haven't mentioned price, but price is an absolute critical component of food and food accessibility. If you think about it, you can buy a burger for cheaper than you can buy a kilo of broccoli. So there's something wrong somewhere. And we need to look at that. But in terms of technology, yes. And in this country especially, technology can play a massive role in helping to get nutritional food to people. But also we have to lobby government. That's an important part. If I speak about the solutions in a place like Barcelona, where there are 47 markets spread throughout the country, and nobody is more than 10 minutes away from a fresh produce market. Talking about vegetables and meat and bread and fish and everything. And the municipalities finance those markets, and they finance the salaries of the staff that work there, because they understand that people need access to nutritious food. And that is the model that they've chosen, to become a market-dominated city where they ensure that everybody has access to nutritious food. And it's not just like here where wealthy people shop at markets.
Yeah.
In Barcelona, people shop at markets, whether you're vulnerable or wealthy or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to get beyond. One of the things that concerns me is that healthy food, Ellen, is thought of as, if you eat healthy food, it's like you're a Lani, like you have access to a lot of money. And that's something that concerns me, you know, and I think it's not only in South Africa. I was talking to a guy who supplies veg boxes in England. He's been doing it for a long time. And he said it's the same thing here, that if you order a veg box and it's delivered and it's organic, then people think it's a status thing, that only if you're very wealthy can you afford that, which means that we're not getting our message across. And players like the fast food outlets are much more creative in how they're messaging and getting the message out to people. And that's why there's a desire, it's almost a status thing to eat, you know, fast food.
Yeah, it is. And like, just to respond to that, or to add on to that, Sheryl, what's interesting, I saw in my travel of the States as well, how expensive it was just to, like, it was better, I wanted to eat at Whole Foods, just rather buy veggies, and because I couldn't stand all of the processed, but it was cheaper. It was cheaper to get a meal for, you know, you could get a massive burger for $2 that would fill you the whole day, instead of, you know, just trying to get some, like, a fresh salad in a store. So coming back to your comment about the markets in Europe, it's not only about the government. Yes, there's a long-term perspective, because if you have unhealthy citizens, your healthcare and costs therefore also rise, and you have the problems that a lot of countries face, non-Western countries. But it also doesn't make sense from an economic perspective of making money, because when you look at what they did in Berlin as well, when they rebuilt in East Europe, but I even see in other African countries where I travel, where there's this mini ecosystem. The one sells, like in Kenya, I love that the one person sells like this fat cook, and then the other person sells like just the polony that maybe goes on it, and this one sells the boiled eggs. And you see it in Asia as well. There's this domino effect, and in that way everyone gets to eat because everyone's selling something. And on that note, so there's also economic opportunity when we have these markets. It's convenient, no one has to travel far, and everyone is a little business owner, you know, in themselves. So Miles, I mean, now that we've listened to everyone, we've obviously all met before as well. Let's talk solutions. Let's talk, and I do apologize, I really don't mean anything bad to the big boys. It's just a figure of speech. But let's say we aren't, it's still going to take us 5 years, and we can see through the not disastrous effect, but actually our eyes that have been opened through this pandemic, and how we found out that people couldn't sell their goods. And even if you could afford it and you lived in the township, you couldn't access it because there was no logistical means to get this served to you. Let's look at alternative systems. So how do we build solutions in the here and now with, for example, the people listening in, ourselves as a Oribi village? We have Sheryl, you know, let's talk about the opportunities. What are the upstream or downstream, the big people opportunities and the small ones? I'd like to hear that from everyone. And I'm going to start with you, Miles. What do you see as upstream opportunities and then downstream opportunities in this? Cool.
So I think actually the points that Sheryl made are totally valid. And also I think the learnings from what you've done over the last while, we just need to figure out how to replicate that and replicate it fast. And I think that it's both a gift and a curse that healthy food is seen as Lani, because I do know that people are very pliable with a great marketing strategy you can make it cool to be Lani. Everybody is aspirant by their very nature. You can make it cool. I don't care how poor you are. Everybody wants to be the next level. So the way we've struggled is the ability to market that and make it cool, because people buy expensive clothes and buy expensive things. So there's no issue there to some degree, obviously. So we can elevate it. And once the Laniness has become the status quo, it quickly filters down to a broader base. It's my thinking. And then secondly,
sorry,
quite
Miles,
frankly,
so can you be our Jamie Oliver? You know, he went into the English school, or our Michelle Obama. Can you be that for us?
Funny enough, tonight at 5 p.m. I'm cooking for Anglo-American. It turns out, maybe I shouldn't have said this client's name, but it turns out,
no, we're all friends.
and
I
can't tell you but let's just say that it turns out COVID has had a huge impact on people's wellness. Being cooped up in their house and all of that, it's abnormal for most people. Like I look at my mom, she didn't mind staying at home. She's been at home since she's retired. She's happy with being in her own space. But now because she's told that she has to stay home, it's just changed everything. Now she wants to be out because she's told to be in, kind of thing, right? So, but also people are dying, right? Her peers, friends. So that mental wellness is becoming a real issue. So one of the things, so today I'm cooking with the people in this organization, because, you know, once you're cooked up, you used to be able to go out and sit down at a restaurant and meet friends. That was a social fiber that kept people together. Once you start separating that, people start now being internal driven and they start looking at their lives, and you know, it's not often a great place to be. But where I was going prior to that was that with markets, why I'm passionate about them is because I think in most communities, particularly Black communities, it's nothing new. It's terrible branding. And, you know, we call them hawkers. That doesn't even sound cool. There's nothing nice about that word. It's got historical baggage. But the fact of the matter is, there's already people who congregate and sell vegetables and stuff like that. But, you know, we've never empowered them with refrigeration or seating area. I mean, how hard can that be? Just put benches. Right? And then once you do that, you automatically get someone else who's now going to prep and cook this food, because you're starting to do what you were saying about this one adds to this one's, you know, the domino effect. Because with vegetables, some of them have a shelf life, so it's perishable. So if I don't sell it, I move it to the guy next door who cooks it. Okay, so there's a longer shelf life to those vegetables. I mean, I grew up in a community we didn't have spinach. It took me forever to figure out why I didn't like spinach. It's because I never had it. And the reason why we never had it was because it's so highly perishable. Because those mamas in the corners that sell vegetables typically don't store stuff like spinach because it's highly perishable. So small things like that could easily be addressed. And then, of course, upstream, we need to figure out, market is one aspect. The world has moved on. People come to markets as an experience. It's probably a weekend thing, but we need to build it out during the week thing. It's on my way home. I pick up something at the market. It's not a destination only event, which I think that's what they've become. It's not an ingrained into my lifestyle thing. And the way we can improve on that is maybe digitizing them. So they remain there, and they're there every day, but now I can also order things online and so forth, and reach a broader base. Yeah, I hope that kind of summed it up.
Yeah, I'm writing this down.
I'm talking too much. I apologize.
No. Errol, what do you say about like the upstream opportunities? What can we do with all of us congregated here? What do you see as opportunities within the informal trading sector? We won't say hawkers.
Even informal is lame.
Yeah, let's just say entrepreneurs, micro entrepreneurs, solopreneurs. Errol? Are you muted? Yeah, there you go.
I'm currently struggling with my network. You know, you are breaking. Can you repeat the question again?
I wanted to ask you, Errol, what do you see as an opportunity, an upstream or downstream opportunity that we can build together? So we've talked a lot about the issues and the problems that we have, but I think through all of this, we've also learned about our individual strengths or the backgrounds that we come from, or our specialization. So what do you see as opportunities within the informal markets or with the micro entrepreneurs? Let's talk about the good.
I like what Sheryl has done. I like what Sheryl has done. You know, what Sheryl has done is more than creating just a market for those few people. Yes, it is nice in a big city to have a place where you have a conglomerate of all services. But I like what Sheryl has done. But what Sheryl has done is that this work in a formal market, this work in a formal market. But if you come to us in an informal market, it can struggle, but it will work, but it can struggle because of the mindset of the traders there, you know. I would love to work with Sheryl to try to accommodate these informal traders, to try to teach them how to trade, you know, to try to teach them the importance of coming together
to
and
Errol,
working together as a team.
Okay, but Errol, are you saying, I mean, I don't know, I'd like to disagree with you. Are you saying that if you look at some of the shizinyamas that you have in Khayelitsha, or even in Langa, you know, the ones where there's, you know, there's the turf, there's beautiful white couches, the food is served nicely, and, you know, like that, like if you go to Rands or something like that, that is a nice place that you want to be. So I don't.
It's so bad now.
Oh, really? Okay, I haven't been for a while, so I don't know. But are you saying that informal traders?
His network is not great. He's struggling to hear.
Okay,
That's
I'm sorry.
what he meant. It's bad. Yeah.
Errol, can you hear me? He can't.
Yeah, it's frozen.
Okay, okay. Miles, do you want to? I mean, I have to disagree with Errol because I want to. I mean, I think everyone wants to have a beautiful environment, and beautiful is not expensive, but that has a bathroom facilities. And or am I wrong? Is this my bias?
No, I think you're absolutely correct. I think if I look at what has happened in Soweto over the last year or so, and it's unfortunate that COVID just came out of nowhere like that, because I think in the township there was now a burgeoning economy around food specifically. Any main road, all of a sudden, restaurants were popping up like left, right, and center. Yes, albeit there was a lot of alcohol-driven, so it was more entertainment than anything. But, you know, it has to start somewhere, right? I think if you lead with what attracts people and then ultimately start building the infrastructure behind it, you know, it's a win-win situation. I do think, though, we need to, you know, put things in place like, you know, I participated in like the Mercedes-Benz Eat Out Awards, for example. I think there has to be a similar initiative for not just the high-end restaurants, just for a broader, because I think that's how you improve the game, because all of a sudden everybody has got peers and they're measuring themselves against their peers, and everybody raises their game. I often say you can measure a restaurant by its bathroom. I can tell you how your restaurant's kitchen looks by going to the bathroom. So if you start elevating and forcing people to track themselves against their peers, everybody benefits.
Sorry, can Errol?
Yes.
So just very quickly before I go on to Reena and
Yes.
Sheryl, I want to say to you, do you really believe that informal traders or the micro entrepreneurs in the townships do not want to change their surroundings? Because you're saying that Oranjezicht is beautiful, it works well, but I don't know if we like, I mean, the different markets that there are in Philippines or wherever, it's going to change. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yes, my sister. If you interact with them, for starters, the level of education is not there. People
So we can do something about that.
Yes, people that we have attracted, it's old mamas who have their old ways of doing things. Really, it's not as simple as you think it is. It's difficult, really, you know. And but slowly but surely, some markets where we have worked with, like in Khayelitsha, it's Kuyasa, it's much better than most of the areas that we have done, because we've introduced in hygiene work. We have introduced them into the CPU team program where they do training on food safety, and they like it, you know. But in some areas, we go there, we struggle, because they are unlearned. They are really unlearned. And it's unfortunately that the markets, really.
Lindelani, I am just offering Sheryl's and Miles' service to you, and they are going to come with you, and I promise I want to prove you wrong. We can grow our economy, but you just need to take Miles and Sheryl with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Reena, over to you. What do you see listening to this, all your research? What are the opportunities besides all of the bad and the ugly? What's the good?
Thanks, Ellen. Yeah, I think this is the most exciting part of this dialogue, is looking at the opportunities. And I see a number of areas that the research has kind of revealed. The first is we've spoken a lot about the big supermarket chains, but we must also realize that they do some very good work in certain supply chains, and we should recognize that. And our point there really is that there's so much potential for the big supermarket chains to scale up their supply development programs. They can take farmers, small processors as part of their enterprise or supplier development programs, really help them build their capabilities, help them to reach those food safety standards that we're talking about, the hygiene standards that we're talking about, and they're very well placed to do that. So there's a role for the supermarket chains themselves, open up shelf space. Miles and I were talking about this earlier this afternoon. We were talking about, you know, if supermarkets can allocate certain proportion of their shelf space in particular communities or particular areas, as we know, they're spreading into peri-urban and rural areas. If they can open up two smaller players, that's a good way of helping build those players' capabilities and giving them an access to markets. So that's on the supermarket side. But I really want to talk about what Miles, Sheryl, and Errol have all been talking about. Let's not just think about the main supermarket chains. What about these alternative routes to the mainstream players? Your markets that you're talking about, think of the independent retailers that supply through cash and carries and into spaza shops. How do we build that alongside the formal supermarket side? And this is where you need infrastructure investment. I mean, Miles was saying there's no cold chain facilities. They don't even have benches. So how do we build the infrastructure to support that side of the market as well, which is a very, very important side for SMEs. They may not meet the requirements of supermarkets, but they can certainly meet some of the basic requirements to supply these routes to market. So I think that's a very exciting area of, it's certainly where policy can come in to try and build the infrastructure in that space. We've also got to treat them fairly. If municipalities, I think Sheryl mentioned earlier about the anchor tenants and shopping malls being your big supermarket chains. We need to think about when municipalities zone particular areas for commercial use, they should think about a diversity of different end markets or retail models, and they should give permission for independent retailers to locate there. So there's a role for local governments to play as well to open up these spaces. And then I guess last but not least, I'm just as excited as everybody on the technology front. I know there's some concerns around technology displacing labor, but I think we've got to look at that more carefully. It might, technology may take away certain uses of labor, but at other levels of the value chain, like distribution, e-commerce platforms, there's a huge potential to actually increase employment if we embrace certain technological platforms. So those are kind of three areas that I'm quite excited about when it comes to food systems and making them more inclusive. Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you, Reena. So you spoke about the infrastructure facilities that are required for greater inclusion. Urban development, such a valid point. I think it was either through listening to your interview or I read it recently, but it was now in the week about, like how these, there's ads placed by government about like there's a public call and you can respond to a development. And I read those, but I've never actually thought, now that we talk about when things are built in a certain way, how that actually has an effect on our land and the ability then to grow food, etc., etc. So it's I like that point. And then talking about technology not meant to exclude anyone, and technology takes on many different forms, and not including technology or understanding it is not going to create more jobs, sustainable ones and long-term ones at the end. Sheryl, thank you, Reena. I'm very eager to hear about your solutions. What are the opportunities? What should we be focusing on? And what will we focus on after this discussion?
Yeah, sorry, I lost you for a while there, but I'm back. I think this food dialogues is one of the solutions. We don't talk to each other enough. We don't hear about each other's problems enough. We focused as entrepreneurs just trying to survive, to be honest, that we don't take a breath and take hands and meet people like yourselves. And I mean, this has been so exciting for me because I can see that so many of us are facing the same challenges. And if we take hands, we can do so much more. And imagine if there was a massive organization called Grow Cape Town, and its aspiration would be to ensure that all Cape Townians, regardless of where they lived or how much money they had access to healthy food. And we could say, right, we need to encourage more farmers to grow and use regenerative agriculture that's good for the planet and good for our health. And if we've got all these farmers growing, then we need to have a place where we can bring all this food. And there we need refrigeration and shelves, and we need systems that we can bring it in and pay the farmers and make sure then that we distribute all that food. We can beneficiate some of it and make all kinds of things, but we can then distribute to hotels, to restaurants, to different markets, to food clubs, to food hubs. We should have things like CSAs where the farmers are paid in advance, community supported agriculture, where the farmers are paid in advance so that they can buy seed and employ people. And then the people who've paid some money can benefit from that food. Food clubs, where neighborhoods buy collectively from small farmers and distribute it to the residents in their neighborhood. We need to work with our city. We need placemaking. You talk, Miles, about why can't the hawkers have benches? It's because we're not making places that people feel comfortable in going to. Benches and some protection for the sun and the wind. And these kinds of things are absolutely critical, that we make inviting spaces that people feel safe at. That's why, in a way, the shopping center culture has run away with us in South Africa, because they were the only safe places for people to go. Because, crime is such an issue. So we need to take back our streets. We need to reimagine how we want to live our lives. We want to take back our public parks. We should be working with a city that manages parks, and we should be saying we want to trade in these parks. We'll look after them, but we want to trade in them. We want to have little avenues to sell produce. We want to have land available to grow things. So I think it begins, Ellen, with conversations like this. And we don't have enough of them. And in a way, probably, you know, this Corona thing, as sad and as tragic as it is, there are some positives that come out of it, that we're looking to collaborate, that we're looking to listen to each other's voices, and that we're taking hands, because if we don't collaborate, we'll just be pushed out of the way.
Yeah.
Sorry,
And we've
Sheryl,
seen-
on that, if
yeah.
I may, I'd like to join hands and collaborate, using your words, and say, instead of it being Grow Cape Town, it could just be Grow. And
I knew Miles was going to say that. I knew Miles was going to say that.
We do the whole country.
Grow Joburg, grow Bloemfontein, grow Durban.
Yes, yes, exactly. We grow.
He's learned something, for sure.
So we grow, right? And I
Move
mean,
aside, Mr. Microsoft.
and it speaks to food. I love even the word. I even love the name, grow, right? And we're growing the economy, we're growing food.
Grow emotionally, grow. Exactly.
Yeah. But with that as a real actionable,
for you.
as a real action that comes out of this, in terms of grow, my challenge to you is that the expertise you've garnered over the last decade, building Oranjezicht market, I think it's time that you step out from working in and work on, and replicate, because it's not going to wait for us, right? You're not going to get it any more perfect. That expertise could be rolled out at scale. You know how to deal with the local government and getting the unused public spaces. You know, there's experience there, and there's and also there's a revenue justification. You can show the economic value of doing it right. So I just like to put it out there and say, let's grow together.
Ah, I love that. I love that. And Reena, maybe we could ask you to come on board with your research skills, because I think also what Miles is saying is like, what is the case study? What is the business case for this proposed model? And like, you would know what are the data points, what we need to take into consideration. And Errol, from your perspective, you would also be able to play that connecting role, because, you know, we also, I think sometimes as well, the fact what Errol was speaking about, the disconnection, I think it's just also, and the shopping centers taking over that role, there's also opportunities for us to move back and closer to each other and to rewrite this narrative. One last question quickly. Can you tell us, Reena, what, if you could just put in the chat what the, if you could give a hint to the publications for the research on Barcelona, or was it you? No, Sheryl, you said, you spoke about the research in Barcelona one. There's a question about that.
Yeah, well, Barcelona, the municipality has established a food council, and the food council is very, very active in ensuring access to healthy food, infrastructure that is available to food entrepreneurs. They have food hubs, they have food clubs, they help entrepreneurs in the food business by establishing food incubators. They bring entrepreneurs together so that people in the food business can work with each other to learn from each other. So there's an entire food ecosystem, from the growing to the distribution, to the nutrition, to dietitians, to everybody that is
everyone's involved. Okay, thank you so very much. Our time's up. I have to hand over to Kurt. I've had an absolutely amazing time. I will reach out to you. Please feel free to do the same to myself or Oribi Village, however we can help. Kurt, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm going to hand over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Ellen, and to all of our panelists. That was exciting, and perhaps witnessing the birth of a new entrepreneurial venture with people such as our panelists. It's no surprise that we're dreaming up ways of making a major impact in the world. So thank you for that, and it was exciting to witness. Yeah, assuming this goes from strength to strength, you saw it here first. This will be a record of world-changing moment. And this has been the final live event of our Food Dialogues for 2020. But the talks have all been recorded. They're all available for replay on the event website at capetown.fooddialogues.info. So don't worry if you've missed something or want to go back and check on something. It will be there indefinitely, and also on our YouTube channel under Food Dialogues. We will also be producing short video highlight summaries of the event for each theme and for the overall event, so keep an eye out for those. And finally, we'll be producing a written Food Dialogues report that will bring these comments, themes, insights together with some critical analysis and recommendations that have come up, recommendations for solutions and interventions to make our broken food system more healthy and vibrant and just. And that's going to be launched on World Food Day, the 16th of October. So we'll be sharing more information about that as the date nears. So thanks to Ellen for moderating this amazing panel discussion, to Reena, Nair, to Miles Kubheka, Sheryl, Ozinsky, Lindelani, Errol, Sibisi for really an amazing, amazing conversation today, and a lot more richness to be mined in future collaborations, as evident from the end of this session. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank our sponsors one more time, the DSI NRF Center of Excellence in Food Security and the DG Murray Trust, and our partners, the African Center for City, Oribi Village, the City of Cape Town, Ickley, and Derek. And thanks to all of you in attendance for joining us. In spite of some of the challenges from our load shedding, we managed to keep an audience with us and to be engaged with some questions and comments, and for lending your voice to the dialogues. We are very, very grateful for that. And for the South African Urban Food and Farming Trust, I'm Kurt Ackerman, wishing you all a wonderful afternoon.